Ring, 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 ring.
Banana phone.
Boop, 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 doop, doop. One didn't count. Okay.
All right, now
Hey
we're
guys,
back.
we're back. And so, as I was saying, because again, we did an initial video that we ended up deleting. So,
We had to.
literally.
We ran out of time.
Literally. So we're starting over. So we had 4 things we were initially going to talk to you guys about. And we are going to, but we're going to talk to you about them on this video. But unfortunately, we're trying to cut down. The last one was a little bit too long by like a half an hour. So we're segmenting it into quarters so we can talk to you about all the things that are very important to understand and to know. So the first things first, what are these next 4 segments going to be called? It's in orange. We discussed it.
Oh, you're talking to me.
I'm talking to you.
We're going to discuss Jacob.
No, in orange.
Oh, who is Israel? Who is Israel? That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to look at.
Sorry, apparently I had the giggles tonight.
Jacob's going to be the first thing we talk about because it has number 1 next to it.
We went over for like an hour before this video. You act like I've said nothing to you.
I mean, I was
like
listening.
We discussed nothing.
We can't spend this entire time giggling.
Okay.
So we ended the last video yesterday, or the last time, whenever that was, to you guys, because we haven't actually posted it yet. But we ended that talking about Abraham and his story and how he came about.
But that's not how we ended it. That's what the video was about.
Yeah, that's what the whole video was about. We ended it. You're right. We stopped at Caleb. Caleb was the stranger that got to take a portion of the land, but was not actually even bloodline a part of the Abraham's family.
But he chose to follow the conditions of the covenant. Like he chose to follow
Sure.
that. So.
And now we're going to go backwards.
Yes.
Because Caleb was actually after this, but now we're going to explain kind of where Caleb
We're
was.
going in the middle this time. So between Abraham and Caleb, we're going in the middle, and that's what the next the next 2 videos are going to be about that middle timeline.
It's going to be 3 if we don't hurry.
Okay. So, yes, Jacob. Who is Jacob?
Who is Jacob?
Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. And he's the son of Isaac. So in order to understand where Jacob came from, we have to know who Isaac is, which is the son of Abraham. And we can just kind of breeze over that, but I don't think that that's probably a good idea. Just to be like, oh, Isaac's Abraham's son, because there's so much more that goes into that story.
And y'all,
so we're
you should go read this for yourself. Read the story.
Man, you got to just read all of Genesis. It's so good.
It is.
Honestly, it's really, really good. So before we talk about Isaac, we have to talk about Ishmael. So who is Ishmael?
Ishmael was the firstborn of Abraham, but was not through Sarah, his wife.
That's right. So Sarah couldn't conceive any children, but she had this handmaid. And the practice back then, and even now in countries that don't offer like IVF and things like that, is to have someone be a surrogate for you.
Surrogate, yeah.
And so, because this was her servant, she was like, hey, I have a servant. Why don't you go?
Isn't that kind of strange? Sarah, surrogate. It's kind of weird.
That's interesting.
How about that?
Not spelled the same, but you know, it's fine. Anyway.
It's an epiphany.
Stop distracting. We gotta get this done. So anyway, so in Genesis 16, we see kind of the story that develops between Hagar and Sarah and kind of what happens there and into 17. So Sarah, pardon me, I have like an eyelash in my eye. So Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham to lay with or to life, though she's never officially called Abraham's wife, which is interesting because normally if they're given for marriage with the purpose of having children, they're considered a wife, even if that child goes to the first wife. So,
Sure.
so normally a surrogate's first child would go to the first wife so she could build a family, even if that wasn't like bloodborne her child. It was like adoption of that child. But Hagar didn't relinquish her rights as the mother of Ishmael, and that caused a lot of issues to the point where Sarah was actually being abusive, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And so she ended
Probably
up running
very
away.
mean to her. Yeah, she ended up running away, and
She saw God, and
yeah,
and he told her to go
back
to
do
Sarah,
what the lady says,
submit to her, quit being a jerk back to her. She's upset she can't have a kid right now. So just be calm.
We're paraphrasing, but yeah, told her to go back. She went back, and then she had the first boy Ishmael. And after that went down,
she got kicked out with Ishmael
well, hold on.
of
There's
Ishmael.
a lot that happened in between that, because then you had the next son born, and
Isaac,
that was actually a story y'all should read. I think it's in Genesis 16 through 20, roughly,
somewhere in there.
And go into that and read that, because that's where Sarah didn't think she was going to be able to have a child. She was old, I think 90, and
yeah,
Abraham was like 99 at the time. And anyways, Yahusha, or
past the age of having babies.
somebody came to him and said, "Hey, you're gonna have a child." Of course, she didn't believe it. They ended up having a child on the exact day they were told. A year later, I believe it was.
And exactly a year later, he said you would have a kid by the time I returned to you, which they did.
Yeah.
And he specifically told Abraham, when he was speaking to him about having Isaac, to name him Isaac.
Right.
And which means laughter, because Sarah laughed. So it was kind of like a reminder of you laughed instead of trusting. So I'm going to make his name Laughter, so that way you have to remember that and don't laugh anymore and just trust what I'm saying.
That's Jennifer's name tonight.
Yeah,
continue.
Now you're laughing.
Continue.
So Hagar and Ishmael are sent away by Sarah, because Abraham's like, look, it's your handmaid, because she went and she was like, oh, your kid, because they actually got kicked out not because of Hagar. They got kicked out because of Ishmael, because he was being very disrespectful. They threw what's called a weaning party, which means that he's no longer getting milk from his mother. He's on Whole Foods only and things like that. So she threw like a little celebration, and Ishmael was like making fun of the baby, essentially. And Sarah said,
the baby being Isaac.
Yes, sorry.
The little brother, the half brother.
And Sarah was like, Ishmael is never going to share in the inheritance with my son, and kicked them out. And she brought it up to Abraham before she did so.
And Abraham didn't want to.
He didn't. He loved Ishmael. I mean, that's his kid. But he said, do what you think is best. And so she kicked them out. And
well, because he was told by God, or Yahuwah, to listen to your wife on this one.
Like, it's going to be better for you if you do on this particular one. He shouldn't have listened the first time, but this time he gave him permission to. And so he told her to do what she thought was best, and she thought it would be best to essentially divorce Hagar from the family along with Ishmael, because Ishmael needed his mom still. He wasn't, he'd, I guess, just turned of age, which is like 13, but he's still a young boy.
Probably 13.
And so she went back to her family in Egypt. She was Egyptian.
Yeah, and during that time, she actually thought that the boy was going to die. There's a story there. You should read it.
It's really sad, but it's really good.
And she cries, leaves him laying there.
But she believes in Yahuwah, because he shows up to her and is like, take your son. You're not going to die. He's going to be blessed too.
There's a well right over there. Yeah, there's some water.
And she didn't see the well, so, he provided for her as well, because Ishmael was Abraham's seed, and Abraham was following the covenant. Ishmael was even circumcised as well on the same day that Abraham was. So he was part of that Abrahamic covenant, and it's important that we understand that. Like, that's where the Arabian people came from, essentially.
And the Muslims.
That religion came from Ishmael's line.
And that's why if you look into their religion, yeah, they follow the Torah, or they at least know of the first 5 books.
They're a lot better at practicing it than Christians nowadays. And
I agree.
Most Jews, I will say that as well, because I know quite a few Jewish people, honestly.
But just like the Jews, they brought their own manly, man-made traditions into their practice,
Yeah,
which has caused, similar problems that the Jews of today
unfortunately. But anyway, so
have.
back
And the
to this.
Christians. Don't get it wrong. They're pulling in
Oh, they have
the
tons of
man-made
things.
traditions are in all three religions heavily.
Absolutely. And that's why religion is so divisive, and why religion is religion, and it's not just following God. It's
Right.
you. Well, what denomination are you? Well, what does that matter if we're all following correctly the way? Which
Yeah,
obviously, if there's so many different denominations, nobody's following correctly.
That's
So
right. So they're just like, hey, what religion are you? Oh, okay, well, what denomination are you of that religion?
yeah,
Oh, okay, well, that's cool. And each one has their own man-made traditions, but
yeah,
we'll break
let's
into
get-
that later on.
Say we gotta keep going.
Abraham's other sons, is that where we're at?
Not quite. So when Sarah dies, okay, which is I think she was 127, so Isaac would have been around 127-ish.
Isaac would have been 127, sure. Sarah. Isaac would have been about 23.
I did the math on this. I'll have to find my notes because I actually did the math to find out how old he was.
Well, if she's
But anyway,
127 and he was born at 90, that would make him about 30.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did the math. It doesn't matter for the story necessarily, but it's just an interesting fact to know. So I'll get back on that at another point in time. But anyway, in Genesis 22, 23 to 24, it specifically states where Rebecca came from. Rebecca ends up being Isaac's wife. So Abraham had a brother named Nahor. And they had another brother named Haran. Haran had a daughter named Milcah. Nahor married Milcah. Then he had sons with Milcah, and one of them was named Bethuel, or Bethuel, whichever you prefer to pronounce. And Bethuel had Rebecca. So it was Abraham's great niece. So what happened was, to summarize, after Sarah died, Isaac was super depressed. And Abraham told his servant, which is the one that would have inherited his house if he hadn't have had Isaac, or Ishmael for that matter. So he told the servant to go to his family's land, go back where he was from, and get a wife for Isaac from among his people, because at least they know who Yahuwah was.
Yeah, and Abraham was in another place at this point. You have to read, there's more detail there, but Abraham was not in his original grouping or area that his family.
Well, we talked about that in the last video with Abraham, how he was told to leave.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Go back home, find a family member, pretty much. Find some family, get back in the bloodline.
Absolutely. And so the servant went. Rebecca actually volunteered, which was strange, but she volunteered to come and be Isaac's wife without ever having met him or knowing really anything about him, which honestly is super brave.
Well, and don't forget the story. The guy showed up at the well, and she offered to
water him,
give him and the camels, and that was
which is what he had prayed for that before he even went. So he saw that as a sign, but he still asked the permission. And then her family tried to keep her back a couple weeks and was like, "Oh, I'll come back for her." And the servant was like, "I can't tarry here. Like, I can't stay. So either she's going to come or she's not." So then they asked her. And that's another common misconception with like arranged marriages and things, that the girls don't have a say. I know there are some places with the man-made traditions where the girls don't have a say.
Yeah, but like when Lot tried to give away his girls.
Sure.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about like a biblical, actual setup thing between families, the girls get a say, and so do the boys. Well, the men and the young women. They get a say. So anyway, she decided she was gonna go, which again I think is super brave, to a strange land. Probably never gonna see her family again. If she does, it's not gonna be for a really long time. To a strange dude, she doesn't know anything about him. And so I just thought that was very super brave. But that's in Genesis 24. So she goes and she marries Isaac, and then it says Isaac is comforted after his mother's death. So after Sarah dies, Abraham marries another chick named Keturah.
That's right.
And Keturah, and that's in where's that Genesis 25, 1 to 4. So we'll explain the importance of this. So you might put a pin in it, put a star next to it if you're writing notes, which I also suggest you do so you know what to go back and read. Anyway, so Genesis 25, verse 1 through 4, Keturah has 6 sons. One of them is Midian, and we'll talk about what Midian has to do with the 12 tribes much later.
Next video.
Next video or the video after. One of the videos, probably the next one actually.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that. So anyway, Ishmael, over here, he has 12 sons and a daughter. It's really important to the story that we know that he has a singular daughter because Isaac and Rebecca end up having 2 sons. And one of their sons is Esau. And the 2 sons are twins. So it's Jacob and Esau. And Esau married women in the land. And his mama really didn't like that because she was sought after to keep the bloodline together.
That's right.
And to keep the covenant together. That no outsiders who practiced differently would enter into the bloodline.
Heathens,
essentially, yes. So he married the women of the land. They were in the land of Canaan, but I think they were Hivites in the land of Canaan. I don't know that they were actually Canaanites. But that is the reason, and that's in Genesis 27, 43 to 46, and also Genesis 28, 1 to 9. But we need to go back and touch on something really quick as far as the covenant is concerned. So we've kind of told the story leading up to Jacob now, but it's important that we understand that though Ishmael was sent away, he still got a blessing because he's part of Abraham's line. Do you want to read that one really quick? We're not reading the verse, many of the verses tonight, just to try to save time because we're already at 16 minutes.
Which one is it?
Genesis 17, 19 to 20.
Here we go. And Elohim said, Sarah, your woman shall bear you a son indeed, and shall call his name Yitzchak.
You're not in the camera.
Oh. Which is Isaac. Sorry. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. And as Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he begot, and I will make him a great nation.
So
hold on. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto you at this set time the next year. This is what we were just talking about. And that's important to realize that, yes, okay, Ishmael gets the blessing as well, or gets a blessing, but his covenant he's establishing, his everlasting covenant that we spoke of in the last video, is for Isaac and his seed. And then it goes from Abraham, then it goes to Isaac, and after Isaac, that's where we get to Jacob and Esau. And Jen's got some on the 2 and how that came about. But
well, I think it's really quick before I go to them. I just want to point out that Yahuwah is coming to him and telling him that he's going to have a son and that was going to be blessed. And Abraham is literally begging him for his other son to have a blessing. That's why it said in there, I have heard you when it comes to Ishmael. He's going to get a blessing.
He deserves something. He's your firstborn.
Yeah, he's just not going to get the everlasting one. Probably due to the circumstance. It doesn't exactly say, but he didn't get the everlasting blessing, but he definitely did get a blessing. 12 princes, a great nation.
Well, when Abraham was given the initial covenant or blessing, or whatever you want to call it, he was like, "You're gonna be the father of all nations." We read that yesterday or the video before, and the actual setup was not for him to sleep with Hagar. It was a choice that he made, and he could have just as easily
told his wife no.
Said, "You know what? Let's just trust in Yah, and let's not do that." But he decided to do it anyways, and
it's a great idea.
Well, I don't know how willing he was, but he sure didn't turn it down. He was just like, "Yeah, I'd like to have some kids, and Sarah's getting pretty old, but
And it's a foreign.
That's up for debate.
It's a foreign girl, and she's probably pretty young. She's definitely birthing age, so she can't be much older than 40, and he's 100. So and she's 90.
And my wife's telling me to go get in the tent with her.
Yeah,
get in the tent, and shut your mouth, old man. Anyway, Moving
Oh
on.
man.
Keep moving.
Anyway, okay. So Rebecca married Isaac. Uh, Ishmael is off another land. He's had a blessing. He has his 12 sons, the 12 princes that were prophesied that he would have, as well as the daughter.
Yep.
Rebecca has, after much tossing, like she asked why the babies were moving so much. Like it's normal for a baby to move in the womb, but she was like, "What is going on?" And God actually revealed to her that there were two different nations that were within her belly, and that the younger son would supplant the older son. In other words, take his place.
We're talking about
Jacob
Isaac's wife
Mhm.
and her pregnancy with the twins, Jacob and Esau.
Exactly. And
Esau was born first.
Esau was born first, but Jacob had his heel and was latched on
He
to
was
him
holding on.
out of the womb, you know. So he was
Where do you think you're going?
yeah, essentially. And so it's just interesting how it all plays out because Esau, when Isaac is dying, his dad's last request, he's a hunter, Esau is, and he's very hairy and all that sort of stuff. And his last request of his son Esau, knows that he's dying, is like, go get me some meat and make my favorite meal, essentially. Yeah. And Rebecca, while he's off hunting, Rebecca is like, oh, we're going to trick your dad. And Jacob's
talking
like,
to Jacob.
Yeah, Jacob's like, I don't think that's a good idea. He's gonna know it's me because I'm not hairy. I'm smooth. I stay in the tents. You know, I
just
read scrolls.
I want to point out that Isaac was going to give that blessing
one way or the other
to Esau. That was his intent.
Yeah, but one way or the other, it was going to go to Jacob because he's the one that's prophesied
had to be
to supplant the older brother.
But Isaac was going to give it to his first.
Isaac might not have known what that meant at the time, but
sure,
one way or the other, it was going to Jacob. But yeah, Isaac's intentions was to give the blessing and the birthright.
And you should read that story; it's really cool.
So the birthright essentially is the house. So like he gets the house, he gets the servants, he gets the cattle, he gets the this, he gets the that, he gets everything. That's the birthright because you're the firstborn, you get everything. And then if I save something aside for the rest of my kids, however many I have, then great. If I don't, great.
Now, why did Rebecca not want that to be given to Esau? Go.
Rebecca hated Esau's wives. So Esau married the women of the land. So he married in the land of Canaan. And that's in Genesis 27:43-46 through 28:1-9. It literally says that that when Jacob went in and stole the blessing, because she put like goat skin on his arm so he'd be real hairy and he'd smell like Esau.
And Isaac was blind.
And Isaac was blind, so he's like, let me feel your arms. Let me be sure it's you.
You sound like Jacob.
Yeah, he's like, but you feel like Esau. And Rebecca knew how to make the meat, so she made it for Jacob and to take into Isaac.
It apparently wasn't fresh, but that's okay too, you know.
Or it might have been. I mean, she could have killed a lamb or something.
Oh, you think
she
went out and went hunting?
No, not hunting. They owned herds.
Yeah, well.
Anyway, so he got the meal, brought it to his dad. His dad's like, this is delicious. Let me feel your arms. Okay, cool. It's you, even though you sound like Jacob. Whatever. Maybe I'm old. I'm losing my hearing. And he gives him the blessing. So when Esau comes in, now mind you, well, I'll do that in a second. So, so Esau comes in and Isaac's like, who's this? And he's like, it's Esau. I made your food. I've been gone all day hunting. And he said, well, I've already given my blessing. And he realizes he gave the blessing to Jacob, who was in disguise. And Esau freaks out. And Esau's like, give me a blessing too, my father. And like gets really upset naturally. So the only thing that Jacob can bless him with is just a general blessing. Really, it's just a generic.
Not Jacob.
Or Isaac, sorry. The only thing that Isaac can bless him with is just a generic sort of blessing. There isn't a blessing anymore to carry the seed of the promise. Like that's been passed on. And it's even more upsetting to Esau, to put it into perspective, because just a little while before that, he had gone out hunting, came home, and he was famished, and he asked for a bowl of lentils. And Jacob said no, because they were always fighting. Sibling rivalry at its best. And Esau literally sold Jacob his birthright and squandered it for something to eat because he thought he was going to die because he was so hungry. And so Jacob had already stolen the house at this point and all the servants and all the flocks and all that sort of thing. And now he's stolen the blessing as well to carry the seed of the bloodline for the promise that's coming to benefit the whole world. So Esau is devastated. But the reason, you asked the reason Rebecca did not want Esau to have it wasn't because she favored Jacob more, even though she did, and it indicates that in the scripture. But it's because she hated Esau's wives. So if you read that Genesis 27 to 28, it specifically says in there that when Esau found out that his mother hated his wives, he was so angry he was going to kill Jacob. So she sent Jacob to her brother's house and was like, get out of here, go marry someone from our bloodline. So when he realized what a terrible thing that was, not only to his mother, but also to his father, he went back to Ishmael and married one of Ishmael's daughters to try to please his parents. But it was too late because he already had 3 Canaanite or Hivite wives.
Right.
And this is what we want to point out too. Maybe she wouldn't have had such an issue with them if they would have conformed to their practices.
That's right.
They could have been a part of the family, and maybe she would have not said anything and just let Isaac bless Esau again, one way or the other. It would have gone to Jacob, but she was so adamant that these women are like pain in my neck, a thorn in my side, and I don't want them to share in the covenant. So it was really similar to Sarah with Ishmael and Hagar.
I was gonna say,
so it's like a repeat of the story. And that goes through to what we're going to talk about, the remnant of Israel, which is going to be our last Israel video, which is very much in the future. And it's just interesting how it all plays out. So Jacob goes to Laban, which is Rebecca's brother.
Right.
So he goes back to where Rebecca's from, where the servant of Abraham initially got the wife. But now we need to go back and touch on one other important thing. When Abraham died, and it doesn't say specifically how old Isaac was or whether he had already had Jacob and Esau. I don't think it mentions that. Do you want to look it up really quick?
No, I don't think so.
I know it mentions Ishmael's
it's
kids.
Isaac.
No,
right? Isaac and Ishmael.
Yeah, I know, but stop. No, I'm saying when Abraham died, it doesn't mention if Isaac already had Jacob and Esau, I don't think, but it does mention that Ishmael had his kids there. Is what I'm saying. That's why I want to see. I don't think it does. It might. It's in Genesis 25. But it says that Ishmael and Isaac were both at Abraham's funeral.
Right.
So I tend to believe, I want to think that Abraham still kept contact with Ishmael and that Isaac had some sort of a relationship with him vicariously, maybe through messages of servants or just keeping tabs on what's going on or something like that. Maybe not. But if he didn't do that, how would Isaac know where to find him to tell him that their father had died? That's kind of my thoughts on it. But what we do know, whether or not they kept contact,
he knew where he was for sure,
right?
Regardless if he kept contact or it was just like we were talking, hey, go find him, tell him that his dad's died.
Yeah.
More than likely, he knew where he was and he had contact. That just makes sense.
So it's Genesis 25:9 is where it says that they explicitly both were there and they both buried him in a cave.
Yeah, it says here on 8 that Abraham gave up his spirit or ruach and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Shechar and Chittai, which is before Mamre.
And that's actually the cave that he had purchased from a man of that particular land for a sum of silver, and it's where he had buried Sarah. So while he had been married to Keturah and while he had had a child with Hagar, he was actually buried with his wife.
And this is actually Sarah. Where it goes into the generations of Ishmael as well. It kind of goes and talks about and I don't think it says anything at this point with Esau and Jacob yet.
Okay, yeah. So Potentially they could have been born, potentially they couldn't have been born. I don't know about that. But anyway, so I just wanted to point that out. That it's important that they were still in real, at least contact at that point. They at least knew how to get a hold of each other, right? And then we know from Esau going back and marrying Ishmael's daughter that they were still in contact at that point.
Sure.
When Esau is older. So whether or not maybe they got back into contact when Abraham died, maybe they were in contact before that, but we know that they stayed in relative contact to know where they were found out.
And we're going into this because it matters, and we're
It
trying
does.
to give you a foundation on who Jacob actually is and who his, I guess, uncle was on the other side.
Mm-hmm. And because it ties in extremely to today, because today we have things like the Abraham Accords, that are primarily between the Muslims and the Jews of the land that are supposedly from the seed of Jacob. So, because they have been fighting for eons, and now they're coming into peace, which is predicted to happen in prophecy. So it's definitely important as you look at the world today, as well as throughout the scripture and the prophets and the writings. You can kind of see little pieces here and there. But anyway, let's continue on. So because we're over time, so I'm trying to wrap it up, so we can get to the next video. So Jacob goes to Laban, which is Rebekah's brother of the same father, Bethuel. So this is Abraham's great nephew. And he has two daughters, Leah and Rachel, and they have two maids, one each. And I pronounce the name Bila. Some people pronounce it Bilha or Bilha. I say Bila. So,
Beulah.
however, not Beulah's no you. Anyway, and then Zilpah is the other one. So Jacob agrees to work for Laban for 7 years in order to marry Rachel.
Right. You should read this entire story. We're not going to get into details, but it's a good story.
Yeah. And then he's tricked on his wedding night. Turns out to be Leah. And he asks Laban what he's done to deserve this. And Laban's like, oh, well, in our land, we have to marry the first daughter first. And had kept that a secret for 7 years. So he's like, well, okay, but what can I do to get Rachel, since that's the person I initially bargained for? And now I'm already married to Leah, but that's not the one I want to be married to. Can I please get Rachel? And he's like, oh, you have to work another 7 years and finish the wedding week. So in a 7-day week, an initial wedding week with Leah. And then after that, you can have
So now it's been 14 years.
Yeah. And he finally decides to leave. But during those 14 years, my mom calls it the baby wars, which it essentially is. And it's Genesis 29 all the way through Genesis 35. It's just them warring like back and forth with babies and who can give Jacob the most kids. And so the first 4 belong to Leah. That's Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah.
Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah.
Yes. And then when Rachel sees that she's not having kids, she gives Bilhah her handmaid, like Sarah did.
Here we go.
To Jacob to wife. Now she's actually called a wife. Gave it to her to wife.
Sure.
It's like 50-50. Like half the time she's a handmaid, half the time she's a wife, and then a portion of the time she's a concubine. So she wasn't really up on his priority list, if we can say that.
Continue, please.
Sorry. So anyway, she has 2 kids, and that's Dan and Naphtali. Then Leah.
Dan and Naphtali.
Am I talking too fast?
Yes.
I'm trying to finish the video. I'm sorry.
Go.
I'll slow down.
Dan and Naphtali.
Naphtali. I love it.
All right, go.
And then Leah sees she's not having kids anymore and gets jealous that Rachel's handmaid is having kids, so she gives her handmaid to Jacob to wife. That's Zilpah. And Zilpah bears him 2 kids, and that's Gad and Asher. So now we have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher.
That's 8.
Then is Issachar and Zebulun, which belong to Leah. So Leah gets pregnant again. And then at the end of that, she has Dinah, which is Jacob's only daughter.
Right.
Then the Lord remembers Rachel. She finally calls out to God and it's like, why are you not giving me kids?
What about me?
And so he remembers Rachel, and she gets pregnant with Joseph. Now there is a second son that she has. There's a little story in there, a really good story. I'm going to briefly tell it. It's in Genesis 34, verses 15 to 24. So Jacob's daughter Dinah, they go to a land called Shechem, and there's a king and a prince, and then all the people. And they settle outside of the land of Shechem, like on the borders. They hash out a deal with the king on what their payment's going to be for essentially renting and or buying the land. And they hash out a deal. Meanwhile, the son, the prince, gets eyes for Dinah. And so she goes out by herself with the women of the land.
Women of the city, is it not?
The women of the city, yes.
Yeah.
So she's like a little country bumpkin, and she goes out with the ladies of the city, and the prince ends up like raping her. And so they obviously have a huge complaint with the king. They're like, what did we do to you? Why did you do this? Why did you defile us? And the king was like, oh, we didn't know that was defiling, because apparently in their eyes that wasn't like necessarily
that's a normal thing.
Yeah. And it's just like you see someone that's pretty, you go
grab her up.
Yeah, you go rape her. Fulfill your pleasures, right? So
that sounds familiar.
Yeah. So then the older sons, not Joseph, but all the other 10 brothers at this point. Rachel is pregnant with Benjamin, but the 10 other brothers leading, wasn't it Simeon and Levi that led? It was Simeon and Levi that led the thing, but they made an agreement with these people that we will not say anything bad. The king asked for his son to be able to marry Dinah to make things right, as right as he could. And they hashed out a deal that all the men and the women had to quit worshiping idols. They could only worship Yahuwah, and all the men had to be circumcised. So then they would be under,
no matter what the age.
No matter what the age. So they talked about it with all the men of the land, and they're like, how are we going to sell this to them? Because that's like a really harsh thing to do.
Yeah.
And the men agreed. The men were like, yeah, we'll do it.
We did y'all wrong.
We did you wrong. We'll do it. Plus, we're gonna
actually think
share in the cattle.
Well, the king had to like talk him into it or whatever. He had to kind of like sell it to
about
him.
The cattle and the increase of the land. He's like, look how small these people are, but look at their herds and everything they've been blessed with.
Look how blessed they are.
Surely, if we worship their God, we'll be blessed too, right? Mm-hmm. And so they agreed to worship Yahuwah, and they even circumcised themselves from newborn babies all the way to old men, like 100 years old or whatever. All the men were circumcised.
Anybody.
While they were sick is when the boys attacked. And
the two brothers.
Well, the other ones were there too, but the two that led it were Simeon and Levi.
I thought it was just the two brothers that went in and slayed all the men while they were sick from their...
I mean, that's a lot of men to slay for only 2 people.
Not hard when they're laying down in pain because they just got the old snippy. Just saying.
I'll have to read up on that again. Regardless, Simeon and Levi, whether they were by themselves or whether they had the other brothers with them, they slew the whole city. So these are people who have come under the house of Abraham.
Yeah, where is this story? I'll look it up while you're talking.
Genesis 34, verses 15 to 24. I believe
Keep reading. Dinner at the time.
Okay, thanks. Good on you. So that forces, because they're a small number, that forces them on a road that leads like away from the city because they're afraid that the neighbors of Shechem are going to gang up on them and blot them off of the face of the planet. And even though Yahuwah knew this was going to happen, but they were seeking vengeance for their sister. They didn't want her to be treated like a prostitute. And so they, being bought out for cattle and stuff. So they killed everybody, all the men, including the king and the prince, which was Dinah's new husband. So they took that chance of having a family away from her. And while they were on the road away from Shechem, Rachel goes into labor, and she has Benjamin. She names him Benoni, which means child of pain, or sadness. And Jacob, renamed him Benjamin, which means child of the right hand or child of my happiness. So that is what I have on that. Do you want to go into Jake or Joseph at all on this one, or do you want to save that for the next one?
Yeah, it was
Simeon.
Simeon and Levi, Dana's brethren,
Yeah.
took each man his sword and came upon the city boldly and slew all males. And they slew Chamar and
Shamor.
Shechem,
Or
his
Shechem.
son, with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. And the sons of Yaakov, Jacob, came upon the slain and spoiled the city, because they had defiled their sister. And they took their sheep and their oxen and their asses and everything that was out in the city.
So
and
the other sons joined them.
joined them in grabbing everything. The ones
So
that went
Simeon
there
and Levi killed everybody, and then all the other sons, except for Joseph,
helped them carry the
and
spoil.
helped them
much.
bring everything out, like the riches. They're like, oh, we're gonna plunder it while we're in here too.
And we're at 40 minutes now.
Yeah. So do you want to end it at that, and we can do Joseph on another video on the next video?
Right, we'll do Joseph next, and then we'll get into the last of the 12. There's one more kid that's still in her belly at this point.
I said she died.
Oh,
on
never
the road.
mind.
I already said that. Yeah, they had
Benjamin was born. So there's 12. There's 12 sons of Jacob from
one daughter.
4 different women, right?
Yeah.
4. Yeah, 12 sons, 4 women, 1 daughter.
Yeah.
At this point.
I want to mention real quick.
And then we're signing off.
The Leah and Rachel were of the bloodline. I don't think it explicitly says where Bila and Zilpah are from, but we know that they're under the house because they follow the rules.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No doubt about that.
So I just wanted to point that out.
It's a good point.
And that's why their sons are also blessed as being part of the 12 tribes.
Yeah.
Because they followed.
Well, they're either full or they're half at least, as far as half of Jacob or Jacob's line, right?
Exactly.
Jacob's bloodline from Abraham.
Exactly.
All the way back to Noah, and then all the way back to Enoch, and then all the way back to Adam.
I forgot Methuselah. He's
my favorite. Methuselah. Yeah. But yeah, that would be the line, all the way from there, all the way to these 12, and these 12
play a huge role. You don't even know.
These 12 is exactly what we're still seeking to be a part of today. And
what we should be still seeking to be a part of.
We are. I don't know about
again, else, y'all probably think that you're Gentiles, but we're trying to show you you're not if you're truly part of God's line. And
if you watch all 6, 7 of these videos, we're going to prove it to you.
Yep. Just stay around. I know this one's a little long too. Probably the next one will be a little long, but we're going to try and make them shorter if we can. At least we stayed on subject for the most part tonight. So
kinda, except for Giggles Magoo over here.
Anyway,
we're signing off.
See you next time.
See you next time. I'm Ron Burgundy.
Okay, that's enough. Do you want the truth? The choice is yours. Like and subscribe.